if you have a question, please raise your hand. Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Senator Begich, very nice to see you here. Good morning. It's nice to see you in your new role as United States Senator.
I've never been allowed on the floor of the House or Senate, so thank you. I'm usually back there trying to get a seat.
And I was going to say, after many years of having you come to us with your blue book of wish lists, I hope you'll be, I hope you'll reciprocate in kind when we bring you ours.
Please don't make it too big like mine. Thank you for all those years accepting it.
Yeah. Just this, I'm sure we'll work very well together. My question is about oil exploration on the north slope of Alaska, and particularly in the National Petroleum Reserve. I just want to ask you what your feeling is about the awareness of your colleagues in Washington about the necessity and the need and the absolutely crucial nature of our ability to continue to work in that place of the world called the National Petroleum Reserve,
right.
and some efforts that have been raised in Washington to halt drilling there. So maybe you can give us a briefing on what we can look forward to.
Yeah, I think, what's interesting, as I said, there's a lot of still misunderstandings of what Alaska is about and what we offer here. And between this session and last session 2 years ago, almost 30% of the United States Senate has changed hands. New people. That's significant. Imagine this body, combined House and Senate, and you have 30% change over. A lot of education. And what I'm finding on oil and gas issues, there's, I don't want to say a total lack of understanding, but just not a full understanding of how you can balance it with the environment we live in. And so I think when you think of npr-a, clearly a great compromise in a lot of ways, because you had development interest, industry interest, environmental interests. They came to a compromise. They didn't agree on some pieces, but they're moving forward. I think that's an example. When I say that to my colleagues, they have no clue what that is. But that's a great example of how we can make it work. So there's a lot of education that needs to be done. And I want to commend those legislators that did come to Washington, D.C. That is important. Because, one, it gives me a chance to kind of give you an update of what's going on, but it gives you a chance to talk to other people about the state of Alaska. And so I think with oil and gas, and I'm, again, happy to say that Secretary Salazar is going to be here next week. I've had many conversations with him about Alaska, as I described to him that half his job is going to be Alaska. And he didn't believe that until he got the job. And now I think he understands it. Same thing with Secretary Locke of the Commerce Department. I explained to him, and I appreciated his desire to do trade missions and all that, which I'm all supportive of, but I explained to him also that he's now not Secretary of Commerce, but the Secretary being a fisherman, because half of his budget is NOAA in Alaska. So it's pretty significant. But I think on oil and gas, I think there's some opportunities for us that haven't been there in the past, because people have an appetite to learn more about Alaska. And working with Senator Murkowski, in the minority party that she's in her caucus, me in the majority party in my caucus, we're coordinating a lot. An example of that was the directional drilling piece of legislation. When I described that to folks, that we can potentially go out 8 miles, like Liberty Field, they were shocked. They had no idea, a concept of what that meant. And then I described it. And then I talked about slant rigs and what that means. Suddenly, you're getting some education. But I do believe that there's opportunity. And I think we just have to keep, it's almost like a campaign. You got to keep repeating the message over and over and over again. But I do think there's some openings.
Thank you. Representative Boo.
Thank you, Senate President Stevens, for the opportunity.
The gun caucus is live and well in the Senate. Oh, I'm sorry, what was your question?
Senator Begich, that has a certain ring in second generation of an election here. Certainly your time constraints didn't give you the opportunity to address an issue here that has particular interest to some of us in education and communications. But could you briefly talk about broadband support in the state of Alaska?
You bet. And thank you for that first note. Yesterday would have been my father's 77th birthday. So thank you for that. Thank you for that note. Let me say that the broadband issue, we view that in the United States Senate. I can only speak for the United States Senate, but I think collectively we view it as infrastructure investment. It's no different than building a road. It's the future. And there is significant money in the stimulus bill, well over $5+ billion to deploy broadband into underserved or not served areas. Well, basically, that helps us a great deal. And that's part of the reason was the language was there because that's the hardest. We call it the last mile. How do you get broadband to these places that maybe, a mile out, in our case, hundreds of miles out? I enjoyed explaining that. I have to tell you, the explanation when people tell me about rural America, I said, you have no idea what rural America is like until you come to Alaska, because they talk about road miles. And I said, road miles? I said, we don't have that in some of our areas. But it is going to be a significant investment. The key on it in the stimulus bill is that we spend it right. And there's two processes going. And again, I want to thank your body here. I know Representative Hawker and his staff have been working aggressively to lay out the guidelines of how groups can apply for some of those grants, how the state can participate, and other nonprofits. But I think it's going to be the first layer of more to come because broadband is the future of how we deliver new commerce, education, medicine, a variety of things. And one thing I'll just mention, when I talk about telemedicine, it's interesting when I describe what we're doing here in Alaska, and it is new. We think some of these things are just everywhere else is doing them. Not the case. Sometimes they are doing really rough cuts on these things. So broadband is going to be a huge long-term investment, I believe, by the federal government to lay the groundwork for long-term economic benefit to this country, as well as medical and educational opportunities. It's going to be a continued effort, I believe.
Thank you. Representative Stoltz.
Thank you, Senator Begich. You brought up a couple issues, salmon, Magnuson-Acton, Secretary Locke, so I figured that was fair game for me. There's federal litigation right now by some commercial fishery interests to close our personal use dip net salmon fisheries in the Kenai Kasila from Chitna. And one of the litigants is the U.S. Department of Commerce. I know you've participated in those fisheries. We both grew up here. I wanted to let Alaskans know, because a lot of these things happen backdoor through things like this federal litigation, and I want to ask you, and I know you will, to educate the Department of Commerce the importance of this all-Alaska personal use fishery, just second only in importance to subsistence, in my view. So,
let me, if I can, Representative Stoltz, thank you for that. And it's interesting when I met with then Governor Locke, now Secretary Locke. My meeting was an interesting meeting. For those that have had an opportunity to come to my office or my cramped quarters, the meeting that I had with them was not only in my office, it was in the elevator, in the train. We just kept moving because I didn't want to lose grip on him for a moment as I had with him, because that was the precursor to the confirmation hearing. In the confirmation hearing, they're very structured. I have to say, your committee meetings are, you may not think so at times, more productive than some of ours, because ours, we don't get that two-way give and take enough. And we had a great opportunity to discuss, and one of the things I did was invite him here. He has accepted that invitation. When that might occur, it's hard to say, but we're going to try to bring him up here. And we're not just going to, take him to some specific areas. What I want to try to do is expose him again to all the issues around fisheries, because I think they need to see the big picture. Sometimes some groups have the biggest push, and therefore they control the agenda. My view is, as the new secretary, he needs to see the whole thing. Now, the good news is he's from Washington State, and they've seen their fisheries decimated. So he's seen the worst of it, and he's been next door to the best of it in a lot of ways. And so I think there's going to be a lot of positive opportunity with him, let me just say, on all fishery issues. Along with that, there's one thing, and people who know me, my style is, I put a lot of stuff in my mind, and people give me information, and then when I get a second, I don't care if you're in an elevator or you're even walking to the bathroom, I'm going to have some commentary with you about what is important to Alaska. And I've had some discussions with some members on the Commerce Committee about trying to bring up a work group up here in regards to the long-term sustainability of all fisheries. Because we are very unique. I mean, when I tell people, other senators, that we have 62% of the harvested catch in this country, they don't believe me. And I have to explain, well, let's look at each region of this country. And they soon find out and realize, and they do the math in their head, many of those regions are decimated, both commercial and sports. So I think Alaska has a lot to offer and a great education, and I would anticipate if we're able to get them up here, you're going to be on that shopping list, so be ready.
Thank you. Representative Sisna.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. President, and Senator Begich. As kind of an update here, last week, Galena students and faculty and their community held an amazingly comprehensive rural energy health conference.
Mm-hmm.
And we heard from people, not only statewide energy leaders, but local energy leaders. And what we heard from them were some, what I think is oftentimes unknown projects that local communities are doing to really to capture some of the local energy sources and really change their sustainability and their existence. And so what I'd like to know is, it is extraordinarily important, not only for rural Alaska, but for urban Alaska, for those rural communities to actually exist in the future, for their health to actually be taken care of, because without energy, health is not possible.
No, you're absolutely right, and I, of course, I'm biased. I say when I do Senate presentations in the Senate, I always say I'm a mayor that just happens to be a senator. And so when you say local government issues or local communities, I always have to say, no offense to my friends here in the state legislature, but I think local government really is an incubator for so many ideas. And I know the mayor from Denali Borough is somewhere here or maybe watching, so I have to give him a little shout out there. But the issue of energy and healthcare is an interesting combo. The biggest consumers of energy in any urban setting is a hospital. They're the largest consumers in the sense of the concentration of their space and square footage. So there's an advantage to figuring out better and cheaper ways to provide energy and sustainable energy. In rural Alaska, we'll have growth and other activities, and energy is going to be truly the life, the existence in a lot of ways. And so we have to figure out, and that's why I'm very proud in the stimulus bill that we put a lot of dollars in there for renewable energy, alternative energy, and money that can be given to the state, as well as direct grants to the Department of Energy, which I think is, I'm of course will encourage every person in this state to apply for every dollar we can get, because if we don't apply for it, someone else will and they'll get it. But I agree with you. If you can figure out kind of the energy piece of it, the healthcare piece plays along well with it because it's a big consumer of energy. Very good point.
We'll have time for two more questions. Representative Gardner to be followed by Senator Terrio.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And Senator Begich, it's really a joy to see you here today. Thank you so much for coming. I think many of us have heard from constituents who are absolutely desperate to get medical care, particularly seniors who are on Medicare. And many of the impediments from our perspective, of course, are federal law. I mean, there are limits to how much we can do directly to impact Medicare. So can you speak to efforts to improve that situation? Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree. As I said in my comments, I mean, Medicare, Medicaid, either one, you can pick it, is a mess in the sense of how it's managed from the federal end. I think there's a lot of opportunity. I know there's a report, I think it was a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, it shows how few physicians are accepting Medicare patients now, which is a huge problem. And as we deal with health care reform, the idea of health care reform is we have a lot of people waiting till critical time when they're uninsured, and they go into the emergency rooms, and they utilize the emergency room services, and they're uninsured. You know, the hospital then carries the cost, spreads it among the rest of the people. So the idea of, in its simplest form, health care reform is to try to shift that, get it more preventive, not getting into those emergency situations. The problem with that is, as less and less physicians, and it's interesting, Alaska is on the tip of the iceberg on this one. Most cities around the country are now starting to realize this issue. We've known this issue for 2, 3, 4 years. But if you talk to other folks around the country, they're just now seeing the non-acceptance of Medicare and Medicaid patients. That is new to a lot of communities. So we get to kind of highlight it, but it also shows the problem. When you do health care reform, which I anticipate later this year, we will go and address this issue pretty aggressively. We have to be very careful that we don't create such a demand. We don't have enough docs, nurses, PAs assisting the problem and taking care of the issue. This is literally where I think the collision will occur on this issue. I think we can solve the issue, what should be covered, what shouldn't be covered, what levels, who, but it's the issue of getting enough docs into the system. If today you wanted to say we need 10,000 doctors, it will take up to 10 years to put them online. If you want nurses or PAs, it may take 2 to 3 years. I know you folks are working on legislation here to help get general practitioners, which I think is a great idea. We on the federal end should do the same thing. We have to increase the capacity of general practitioners. I think the healthcare issue is going to be very controversial, but for the first time that at least I have seen, business, labor, government have decided we got to solve this problem. For the business, it's costing them too much money now, more than they've ever anticipated. Labor sees that their benefits could be potentially reduced in next term contracts or future contracts. Government, it's Medicare and Medicaid. Just a simple one that I know we're going to change is right now we're not able to negotiate for Medicare patients prescription drugs pricing. We can do that with the VA, and we save a lot of money. But we cannot do it by Medicare because it's legislatively prohibited. I don't know why that was put in. I can only guess. But there is great desire, especially by the freshmen, to change that. That will save literally tens of billions of dollars to the Medicare system. Just that one simple change. So there's a lot of ideas being put onto the table, but we have to make sure we watch the flow, that we don't oversupply by putting a lot of people into the system right away, and then we end up with no demand or not enough folks to service those folks. That's the real catch there.
Thank you, Senator Terrio.
Thank you. And Senator, good to see you.
Good to see you again.
I represent a fairly conservative part of the state of Alaska, but I'm sure that you are hearing from people around the state as you travel and also electronic messages. A number of people are just, they're fearful. They're fearful for what is happening to the nation. They're actually, since I've taken elected office, it's the first time I've had people actually express fear for the future of the country. A lot of that is tagged to the size of the deficits, and I know this Congress and this President, the deficits are not new, but it is projected that in the next 5 or 6 years, the amount of debt that is carried by the country could increase by up to $10 trillion. And there's only 3 ways we can deal with that. We can either repudiate the debt, declare bankruptcy, which I don't think the country is going to do. You can tax the economy, or you can get into a system of hyperinflation, which for those people that didn't overextend themselves and did save money, they could see their good actions being negated by the value of their savings just wiped out. How in the world are your children, is your son and my children, how in the world are they going to pay for the amount of debt that this country has accumulated?
Now that's a great question. I hear that not just from Alaskans. Let me just put that on the table. I hear it all across the country. First off, when I came in the office, the national debt stood about $10.5 billion or trillion dollars. Huge. Almost doubled in the last 8 years, 9 years. Where we are today is no easy area. It is a very difficult situation we're in the sense of this economy is in, like I said, the worst position we've seen since the Great Depression. We have seen every conservative and liberal economist, excluding just a couple of them, say the only way we can move this economy, we've got to stimulate it. That means we've got to put some money on the table, and that's what we're doing. Do I like it? Not necessarily. Is it necessary? I believe it is, along with a couple other things. I think you missed a couple on your points there. One is also you got to grow this economy, putting broadband down, building roads, water, sewer. We got a D- for our public infrastructure in this country by the private sector engineering community. D-, because we neglected the investment. I know as a former mayor, when you invest in the infrastructure, you will grow your economy. 45% of the tax base of the municipality of Anchorage in the 6 years I was mayor was new construction, new business, because we laid water, sewer, roads, public infrastructure. That's what you do. That grows the economy. There is an enormous amount of pent-up dollars from some of these large corporations that are waiting to see what happens, what we do. When we passed the stimulus bill, I can't tell you how many times that I sat with individuals from other countries, representatives of other countries, watching what we do in this country. The eyes are on this country to determine what we do and how we pull out of this. Part of it is putting some money on the table. Part of it is laying that infrastructure to encourage private sector investment. But also, for example, what we did on this budget bill that just passed. We went in there and the moderates got together. We cut $15 billion out of discretionary expenditure. We made sure the deficit in the next 5 years will be cut in half, which was not the plan that necessarily Obama had put forward. there's a practicality to the folks that are currently been elected this last cycle, because we've seen it from both sides. But we also know it is a very difficult time we are in right now. Putting $100 million back into Alaskans through our work pay credit is huge. That's money back in the pockets of individuals. Why is that important? Because you have to stimulate this economy. And that is a critical part of this equation. Everyone likes to say there's a simple answer to this. There is no simple answer. Even when the Republican minority on the House side decided to come out with their budget proposal, it was amazing. It's deficit spending. There was no balanced budget proposal they had, because in order to get us from where we are, we have to get the confidence. That's actually that's the common denominator we have to have. We can do all the right things, get all the fundamentals right, get the corporations feeling good about themselves, doing all that. But if we don't have the public confidence up, it really doesn't matter. And that's part of our task right now. And if you look, and I cross my fingers every day, those last 2 weeks or so that the market went up, even though the last 2 days have been a little softer, that raised the confidence level in people. They felt a little bit better. But I agree with you. Those stories I told you are real stories of people that I see every day. I hear them on the plane. I go to the grocery store, and I hear them and see them. But if we don't stimulate this economy like we're doing right now, we're going to be in trouble, I guarantee you, down the road. But if you look at some communities that have been hit the hardest with foreclosures, they're starting to see a slight rebound. There's more refinancing starting to occur. There's a few indicators, kind of a mixed message right now, and that's good in a certain way, because a month ago, it was just one message. Everything's going down. This month, it's a little mixed, and that's a good sign. But I agree with you, and that's this group of moderate Democrats that I participate with, deficit is one of our targets. Now, that's why we work double time with the president's budget to reduce the deficit even more. And I agree with you. It is something that has to be in the forefront, and we can't just say that we're going to do A, B, C and not think about that at the same time. Absolutely agree with you.
Thank you very much for being with us, Senator Begich.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.